Tool and Info, which I happen to be the director of, Community Alliance Attendance, Join, Street Roots, and Oregon Opportunity Network. So I just want to give a little round of applause. And as some of you know, parking is free tonight, so hopefully everyone's aware of that. And just a couple neighborhood housekeeping measures. If you did happen to park in a neighborhood, would you just be quiet and you return to your cars this evening? Great. And if you could also take a moment right now to silence your cell phones or other electronic devices so they're not distracting us during the evening, that would be fantastic. We're also honored to have four folks with us tonight who are running for, two folks running for mayor and two folks running for city commissioner. And they'll be introduced later, but let me just acknowledge them. So Portland mayoral candidates Charlie Hales and Jefferson Smith. And Portland City Commissioner position 1 candidates Amanda Fritz and Mary Ellen. As you've no doubt noticed, these hardworking folks have attended many forums and debates during this season, so we're so pleased that they are participating in tonight's forum, really focused on affordable housing issues, issues having to deal with people who are not able to sleep inside in our community. So tonight's event is moderated by Wendy Willis, who is the director of the Policy Consensus Initiative and the Director of Research and Development for the National Policy Consensus Center, which is, I think, the longest title that I've ever had to introduce. I've had the pleasure of knowing Wendy since she was the Director of City Club several years ago in Portland. She's also been the Assistant Public Defender for the District of Oregon and a law clerk to Chief Justice Wallace Carson, Jr. of the Oregon Supreme Court. She's a Senior Fellow of the American Leadership Forum of Oregon. She's also a poet. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see in the paper this weekend when you had a fantastic poem published. And I thought it would be fun to read a line from it just to illustrate her sort of witty style and why we asked her to moderate, but it's not really a poem you can read a line out of. And I don't think you can read a poet's work in front of them, actually. So I decided that was a little too risky. Anyway, it's a fantastic poem, and take a look at that. So we're lucky to have her as our moderator tonight. She's going to ask the candidates 12 questions. And the candidates will have the opportunity to make a statement midway through and then also at the end of the program. It's going to be a tight schedule, so we will have timekeepers who will let the candidates know how much time they have left so that we can stay on track. So I'll just turn it over to her.
Thank you, Liesl. You have to go to the podium, please. Thank you very much for having me.
I have one candidate tall.
Traffic was very bad.
Traffic was pretty heavy.
So what's the consensus of the organizers? I think we can start with that. Okay. Okay, good. Thanks. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. We'll try to keep this moving and not let anyone stand too close to one another this evening. So we'll start with the first question. We're going to start with the two candidates for commissioner, and then we'll proceed with the candidates for mayor. The first person we're going to call on to answer the mayor. The first question, for all four of you, is what policies would you pursue in order to increase choice for low-income people in the private housing market? Ms. Fritz, you may begin.
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. It's wonderful to be back here on 82nd Avenue at PCC Cascade, and I'm very glad to be here as your City Commissioner. And I will continue to work with City Commissioner Nick Fish. I doubt if I'm going to be able to rest the Housing Bureau from him in my second term. I will continue to be a strong supporter. One of the policies that we've been working on and will continue to address is to make sure that all private landlords offer the opportunity for Section 8 vouchers to be used in their facilities. So that's something that I know that Commissioner Fish has been working on at the state level, and it's something we heard about in our electoral. How much time do I have? 2 minutes. Thank you. It's something I started when I first got into City Hall with inviting citizens to come in to set our legislative agenda priorities. In the first year, in 2009, the legislature was already in session, but in 2010, 2011, and now again in 2012, we have had a robust process where we invite citizens to come in and tell us what your priorities are, rather than the housing bureau and the city council setting our priorities for housing. So we had a wonderful forum in August and another one in September, and amongst those was the issue of how do we use a range range of different legislative fixes at the state level for affordable housing. I just today met with our federal lobbyist and again said that more money needs to be a top priority. But I will continue to work on policies that require and make sure that private entities renting do so in a fair and just and equitable manner.
Thank you, Representative Nolan.
Thank you, and thanks for being here tonight. I know you all have something else you could be doing tonight, and that you're here in this place on this topic says a lot about the community here. Not quite working. Is that better? Okay. Specific to the question of private investment in affordable housing, I've been visiting for the last year with leaders in housing, public housing, subsidized housing, nonprofit, as well as private investors. And I'm asking them, what can City Hall do? What can city agencies do to make it easier for you to do your job, for you to invest and build affordable housing and maintain it? And here's what I'm hearing from many of them across the board. Regulatory certainty is important. They need to know that what the rules are and that the rules won't change after they've started a project, so that they can, in fact, secure the funding to build the project. They want to make sure that they can get quick turnaround on applications they have to make. Land use changes, permit requests, anything that requires licensing. These are things the city can do pretty easily. Third, the fee structure. And I know the city has done some things to assist affordable housing, but we want to make sure that the fee structure for new developments really reflects what's affordable and the differentiation between working family housing and high-end housing. And finally, I have a track record of bringing together people who have competing interests, who have different points of view, who actually sometimes compete with each other, and helping them solve problems in a way that gets everybody to give a little of their own interest in order to secure the best solution for everyone.
Thank you. Jefferson Smith, do you need me to repeat the question?
Be great.
Okay. What policies would you pursue in order to increase choice for low-income people in the private housing market?
So first I want to clarify the definition of terms, and we're saying the private housing market. And if we are including, for instance, subsidized affordable housing through the 30% set aside, etc., I am going to include such things in my answer. And I'll start with that. We've got to make sure that the 30% set aside remains a floor, not a ceiling. We have too few tools, and we have to make sure we can leverage that one. Second, one thing that I want to hear from people in this room, and I have had the chance to hear from some of you over the last 13 months, and will hopefully have more chances going forward, about thinking about the gap between someone experiencing homelessness and an apartment somebody can't afford. And what options do we think are the most strategic, most fundable, and the most moral? Somewhere between the Dignity Village and an apartment or a home somebody can't buy. I've heard a range of options. I don't intend to be the housing commissioner, but I want to hear from the housing commissioner on what the most sensible options there are. Next, with increased density, we upzone certain corners, making sure that that sort of subsidy lies alongside increased housing options, including affordable housing options there. So, for instance, if we're having conversations about new 80-unit buildings on Division, issuing permits and upzoning certain areas, saying alongside that zoning is going to come a commitment for some affordable housing. One of the differences in this race is how we feel about inclusionary zoning. I think that it was a huge mistake for this state, under the advocacy of the Home Builders Association, to create a statewide ban. If I am the mayor, I will work with our commission and work with our legislative lobby team to work to eliminate that, and time is up. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Representative Smith, you're still in the hot seat. This is question 2. It's for all of you. We will start with the mayoral candidates. In your first term,
what will your top priority be with respect to housing, and how will you accomplish this?
It'll be money, and I can't promise I will be able to accomplish it. But I think we have to think about and recognize that the funding realities for the organizations that help put this on, and for the human beings who are trying to face the biggest, not only the biggest economic crisis of my lifetime, but also the biggest wealth disparities in this country since before World War II, that we've got to figure out the money. And that is why I am a strong opponent of the Realtors' proposal to eliminate by constitutional amendment the possibility of having a real estate transfer fee. I can't promise I will be able to impose one, but I will work even now with the breadth that I have to keep it from making it so easy for that option to be removed from the table. We should be looking at regional funding solutions. We should be looking at state funding solutions. And I will say, and I will try to use this cop-out answer only about 4 more times, that I will not intend to be the housing commissioner. Nor will I intend to call the tune on every housing funding proposal. But I will try to sing that tune when people who are smarter than me write it. Now, some of the things we've already talked about, that we've already done. I'm proud to be joined with Representative Nolan in the passage of the referral for this, and joined with Commissioner Fritz in championing its passage. And only 3 of the 4 people, I think, can say either of those things on this dais. And that is proposing the last set of statewide revenue measures for all services, including human services. Those are measures 66 and 67. And let me spend my last 10 seconds talking about that. Right now, the only people who remember that very well are the people who oppose it. People like the Realtors Association, people like the Corporate Business Alliance, people like the Developers Association. Those folks who supported the other candidate. I need the people in this room who wanted that money to remember it now.
Thank you. Mary Ellen, you're next. Do you need to repeat the question?
No, I think I've got it. My top priority as a city commissioner is access to safe, appropriate, and affordable housing at all income levels, with an emphasis on preserving existing housing. In the legislature as the co-chair of Ways and Means, I used my influence to make sure we dedicated $1 million in matching state funds to secure a $5 million MacArthur grant as part of a revolving fund that ended up preserving 3,000 units of affordable housing around the state. Using your influence, using your clout, frankly, to do good things is what I think we expect leaders to do. So what does that mean at the city level? It includes efforts to prevent any further erosion through foreclosures. We are having in some Portland neighborhoods a near foreclosure crisis. I have been a banker in small business lending, not in mortgage banking, but I talk their language, and I can use that influence and state law that Representative Smith and I helped pass to prevent double tracking on foreclosures, to make sure that practice doesn't happen in the city of Portland. I can also use my relationship with people who are investing in affordable housing to help them be able to produce things that really are affordable for people in Portland and accessible and appropriate to their needs.
Representative Nolan, I can't see you, but I'm leaning toward you. I just want to ask a follow-up questions about it. And you talked a lot about how you use your influence and relationships to enact some of your priorities. What would you do as a commissioner within the 4 corners of your authority as a commissioner to affect housing?
Well, this depends a lot on whether I have responsibility for oversight of the Housing Bureau, which I agree with Amanda on. We have someone who's doing a very good job of it right now, and I wouldn't even ask to have it because he's got momentum going. So as a city commissioner, I work collaboratively with him, with the rest of the council, to secure funding, to make sure we're enforcing existing ordinances, which are not necessary. Those aren't the purview of the Housing Bureau. That's something the entire council has to do.
Thank you. Commissioner Fritz?
I agree with Jefferson Smith that funding at every level quite a challenging task, especially when we got into intense discussions about intensifying housing within the city of Portland to avoid spreading out onto farm and forest land. So that's definitely something that needs to happen. We have 40% of the population in Portland County, we get 80% of the social services and housing costs. So that needs to change. As part of the resolution to counter women's hunger strike, we agreed that we're going to have a regional summit in November. And one of the pieces that I'll be co-leading with Commissioner Deborah Grafori is the particular issue of women living outside. And given that we do have a wonderful housing commissioner, I wonder how many times we can say that while he's here. And I'll continue to be supporting
Until he turns red.
My particular area of concern within the realm of affordable housing needs and houselessness needs is women living outside. I'm the 7th woman ever to serve on the Portland City Council, and in fact, it's in some ways, of course, a celebration that we have 2 progressive women seeking the Commissioner number 1 seat. I don't think that's ever happened in a November election before. So that's a good thing, but it's been very much on my heart for the last 4 years that we need to coordinate better between the county and the city, and that is being worked on already. We don't have enough shelter for women to be safe if they're living outside, and that's something that's all of our problem, it's all of our challenge, and it's something that I want to be very instrumental in putting some more focus on in my 2nd term.
Thank you. Welcome, Commissioner Hales.
Sorry.
We understand that you had car trouble, so take a breath and a sip of water. So we're actually partway through question 2, so I'll ask question 2 to you. And that question is, if you were elected mayor, in your 1st term, what would your top priority be with respect to housing, and how would you accomplish this?
Again, my apologies for being late. Our aged pickup truck is now sitting quietly in the Burgerville parking lot at 11th and Hawthorne, and we hope it'll still be there when we get back. We'll see if it's going to have another lease on life after tonight. Continuing the 30% set aside and then finding the next revenue source. Obviously, again, we'll always continue to refer, as we should, to the good leadership of Commissioner Fish and the staff at the Housing Bureau that are making a diminishing resource work. But we're going to have to find new revenues, state, local, to support affordable housing. The other thing that I know that works so well here, I've been part of it over the years, being involved in HOST and REACH myself, and working with all the nonprofits, is we've really used community development corporations and the nonprofit sector especially well in Portland. We've got some new tools, the land trust model that Proudground and others are trying out now. So that partnership between a city funding source and a nonprofit provider community, whether we're talking about Central City Concern and transitional housing for people coming out of homelessness, or Proudground and their home ownership model, or REACH and affordable rental housing, that partnership is essential to us making whatever resources we can find stretch and do the job.
Thank you. Each one of you now, you don't know this because you weren't here, but each one of you now has mentioned additional resources as one of the keys to affordable housing. What are some promising sources for that money, given where we are in the economy and in public sector financing?
Yeah, I think, one, I oppose the real estate transfer tax prohibition that's on the ballot now. So that's always been one potential source. A levy, of course, has been mentioned. I'm given how over-reliant we are on the property tax. We have 2 property tax-related measures that I happen to support, one for libraries and another for schools, on the ballot this time. I think all of us are, even those of us that are really invested in the cause of housing, wary about once again going to the property tax as a source of general revenues. So it's a tough problem to solve. That's why it hasn't been solved yet. But I think at least we should be creative, and again, we should look at both state and federal sources as well as our own ability to raise revenues here locally.
Thank you very much. Okay. Question 3 will return to the city council candidates, starting with Amanda Fritz. Would you support the expansion of the single-family tax abatement for affordable housing development to all areas rather than just distressed areas as it's currently done?
Why or why not? You have 2 minutes.
We just did a 2-year project on looking at the tax abatement program and had an inclusive process to decide where the distressed areas are best targeted. So no, I think we've done a good job on looking at that. If I'm thinking of the right project, that's something that we've already looked at, and I believe we worked with a very diverse group. And when I say we, Commissioner Fish graciously invited me to participate in this project, knowing how very interested I am in planning and zoning, and how when I was on the Planning Commission for 7 years, I was involved in looking at the single-family home ownership incentive areas. So that's what we did, but we looked also at the other transitory tax abatements and the multifamily tax abatements, worked with Commissioner Kogan and Commissioner Kafori at the county, and a pretty broad range of stakeholders. Then we went out to a public process, and we took a little more time, having come to consensus within the committee, to take it out to the wider community, made some more changes, took the extra couple of months that it took to get to consensus, and I think we've now refined a very good program that we will see how it works. It's the kind of thing that you want to continually keep going back to check on. I was a nurse for 27 years before I was elected to the council, and in nursing you don't just give a medication and assume that things will be better. You go back after a half hour and ask, is your headache better? And if it isn't, then you do something different. So that's the approach that I've brought to City Council. We need to have regular report backs, which we do with these kinds of programs. Annually we get to know what's been successful and what's not. And so our council has been committed over the past 4 years to continual improvement, and that's what I'll continue to do over the next 4 years.
Thank you. Representative Nolan, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think this directly relates to the question you just asked about raising revenue. Because until we bring new revenue into the system, expanding this tax abatement or any of the other housing tax abatements simply dilutes the effectiveness in targeted areas. And that's the trade-off. If we've got something that is having an impact, and if we spread it out without putting new revenue in, we dilute that ability to have effectiveness, and maybe to the point where it in fact loses the benefits that it's producing in the distressed areas and doesn't have enough critical mass in other parts of the city to have an impact at all. So you risk losing some impact in some areas, and admittedly it doesn't cover the entire city, but do we really want to lose that positive benefit, even if it is only helping distressed areas, and end up with something that has minimal effect or no effect, but it's citywide? So I'd be anxious to work on adding to the revenue, and when we get to that point, then I think expanding the tax abatement citywide is an appropriate conversation. But until we do that, I think it hurts the benefit that the program is having now.
Thank you. Charlie Hales, you're next. Do you need me to repeat the question?
Please.
Would you support the expansion of the single-family tax abatement for affordable housing development to all areas rather than just distressed areas as it's currently done? Why or why not?
I think at least on a limited basis, I would support the expansion of the tax abatement, because given our lack of revenue options, or at least a short list, tax abatement is a tool we have. And I'd be, at least on a limited basis, be interested in expanding its use beyond where we're using it now.
Thank you. Jefferson Smith, you have 2 minutes.
Probably not in the first year, and based in part on the conversation that we just heard. I want to offer 2 deeper thoughts, in part to lobby the people who are here. One, I think we need to be thinking more cautiously, generally, about tax break tools. So there was just a question in the previous round about what we would do for funding, and what we heard was, well, it's hard to raise property taxes, true. It's hard to do other things, sales tax, true. But let's say something that has been going on in our state. In the early 90s, I think about a third of the potential general fund in the state went to tax expenditures, tax breaks, things like that. Now it's about a half. So we are now spending more on tax expenditures and tax breaks than on education, public safety, and healthcare combined. That same addiction to tax breaks has driven us now to where we're nearly a quarter of property tax revenue spent at urban renewal debt load. Now, this does not mean I will cure us of tax breaks. In fact, I promise and assure you I will not. But I do think we need to take a double pause beat before we rely on that tool. It seems real easy. It seems free. It's neither. Second, I also want to lobby the room on economic diversity. Another reality that's happened in our city over the last 20 years is we have had, in many parts of our town, increasing segregation and concentration of poverty. And concentrating poverty does not concentrate challenges, it exacerbates them. And we don't have to think or look too much further from where this building is right now to see what's happened over the last 20 years in our city. We don't have to, and I got to say this, when I started running for the House, it wasn't very long ago, it's been pointed out by the newspapers, the percentage of free reduced price lunch in my school district was 70%. By the time I won my seat, it was 74. When I started running for mayor, it was 80. 3 weeks ago, it was 84. We are facing a crisis in this part of town. And I don't know if I'm going to win this race or not. But if I don't win, I'm going to need help on that much, much more.
Thank you, Representative Smith. You can keep your mic on because you're up again next. This is a question for the mayoral candidates first, followed by the commissioner candidates. What are the revenue and policy priorities that you will work for at the state and federal levels to increase access to affordable housing and human services? And some of you have spoken to this already, so if you have other priorities, please mention those. You have 2 minutes to respond, Jefferson Smith.
And what's interesting about our first 3 or 4 questions, they're all kind of the same question. What the hell are we going to do? It's all the same question. What the hell are we going to do? Let me offer a couple things. I want to reiterate that we need to start building partners outside the city. We need suburban partners in the legislature. It ain't going to be enough to have just the Portland delegation to push on a return to the allowance of inclusionary zoning. Second, we're going to need statewide tax break reform. There will be various people who propose various things. I will try not to be too much of a political opportunist to quell any fire when somebody proposes something that I don't think should be our first priority, whether that's a sales tax or something else. But I think tax break reform needs to become a major priority for our state. And I will work with our legislative delegation and lobbyists on that. I hope, and third, that we will keep in mind progressivity in our tax system. Because a lot of the people we're seeing right now in our tax debate is there's energy around a sales tax. There's energy around a $35 flat fee for everybody to pay for arts. There's energy to increase tax breaks. But the political power around trying to increase or at least preserve the progressivity in our tax base is harder to find. We did it when 66 and 67 happened. And now, I will say again, the people who remember that are mostly people who can afford to give $600 or $1,000 or larger checks. We will need people here to remember that principle. I hope we will continue to push for real estate transfer fee. I hope we will push against too big a reduction in systems development charges at the city level. I hope that in the state level we will try to increase flexibility for systems development charges so they could cover some for schools. We'll have a chance to talk more about that in the answer to another question. But the biggest thing I want to say is we've all got to embrace the question, and we've got to work with the media to figure out what the hell we're going to do, and we're going to need a lot of help.
Representative Smith, can you tie your position on tax reform specifically to affordable housing and human services, and how your commitment to progressivity and reducing tax abatements might affect either affordable housing or human services?
So human services is one of the 3 biggest areas of the state budget. To do anything about it, we've got to address the state budget. And I don't think the feds are going to bail us out with the Tea Party Congress anytime soon. So our options to get more money going to human services, going through the state budget, is one could say, let's fund education less. I will tell you, you will not have a candidate for mayor who says, yes, let's cut education less, nor do I hope you want one. So how are we going to get more money? Sales tax, one option. Property tax increase, maybe sort of. Measure 5 and 50 reform, maybe kind of sort of. Tax break reform. If we either put a cap on the overall level, constitutionally, this was pitched some time ago, and I know Bill Bradbury talked about it a little bit, but a constitutional cap on the percentage of potential general fund that could go out in tax breaks and expenditures. That's one option. 2, you could give the governor allotment authority to not only when the governor is unilaterally cutting the budget, but also to unilaterally cut tax breaks. 3, you can make sure every tax break proposal goes through Ways and Means. Right now, you can increase you can add a tax break with 31 votes in the State House. To get rid of one, or even give one a haircut, it takes 36 votes. So all of that will inure to the benefit of the overall state budget, a significant portion of which goes to human services.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Commissioner Hales?
You know, in all honesty, my number one priority at the legislative session will not be a housing issue, as important as it is. And that is, I think the number one priority at the next session of the legislature is adequate school funding for all students in this state. And we need to, as a community, I believe, make that the first priority, because we have housing issues and we have housing needs, but we've held public education together with duct tape and bake sales for 20 years. And there are a lot of parents who are wondering whether the social contract that you get to send your kid to a great public school with a complete curriculum, they're wondering if that deal still holds. And I think it's essential that we go to the next session of the legislature as a community, not just one of us as your mayor and your city council, but also all of the school districts and parents and the business community, and say, this is job one. Under the Constitution, the legislature's first responsibility is funding schools. We must do this first, and we probably need to ask them in the same breath to repeal the kicker, both personal and corporate, if it hasn't already been done in the ballot measure that we're going to vote on, in order to pay for it. But that has to be the first priority of the next session of the legislature, in my opinion, and from thousands of front porch conversations with parents that want that social contract to hold. After that, there are some opportunities for housing. I think what Representative Kotek is proposing in terms of a reform of Section 8 and making Section 8 vouchers available everywhere, and no longer allowing landlords to discriminate on the basis of Section 8, making that part of the housing package, trying to build a broad coalition that will support that. And I will be prepared to go to the real estate community and make the case for that. And I know that won't necessarily be an easy conversation, but I'm prepared to do it. I think I have some credibility with them, and it's important that we come together as a state on that as well. So that would be my second, probably most important priority at the legislature, and directly, obviously, on the housing front.
Thank you. Commissioner Fritz, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, got it.
Thank you.
I agree that it's unlikely that we're going to get any more money from the federal level, although affordable housing is definitely a federal issue, with people being able to travel across states, and people do come here. Nobody goes hungry in Portland, but people do go unhoused, and that becomes a challenge for the city of Portland as well as the metro area in the state of Oregon. I'm glad to know that we have Will White in Washington, D.C., and as well as our elected representatives who certainly understand the challenges that we face. So we're looking at what can we do at the state level and what can we do at the local level, and particularly in the city of Portland. I've been an advocate for affordable housing since we first established the Coalition for a Livable Future back in the mid-1990s, and the environmentalists started talking with the affordable housing advocates, and we realized that we're all in this together, and that has really stood us in good stead in this recession. That philosophy, and also the leadership of the Oregon Opportunity Network and others in bringing people together so that we decide together what is it we're going to advocate for. Is it the document recording fee? Is it the change in Section 8 vouchers? Is it inclusionary zoning, or certainly opposing some of the preemptions? Those are things that we've worked on together. And so that's my pledge to you, that I'll continue to do that. At the local level, we need to figure out, we need to continue to fund the safety net, and we need to look at these issues to see what else can we do together. And a big part of that is our nonprofits and our business community, and working together to figure out what other strategies can we use to help people through this particularly rough time. We've been through rough times in Oregon before, and we can do it again. We have to make sure that we're thinking about everybody and that we're working together in a collaborative manner. That's what I've done for 4 years and what I'd like to keep doing.
Thank you. Representative Nolan, you have 2 minutes.
So I'm going to take a little different tack on this answer than my 3 colleagues have, and talk not just about the need and the good idea of increasing revenue, but what I've actually done to deliver revenue. Some in housing, but some in related areas, as an example of my ability to deliver results, to deliver actual dollars that get into programs, not just good ideas. I talked earlier about the $1 million that I made sure I secured for Oregon Housing and Community Services to match the MacArthur grant. Also protecting that agency from proportional cuts at a time when it was very, very pressing. Everybody wanted to make the easy way out. Let's just cut everything proportionately. And there were certain programs that, as co-chair of that budget committee, I said, we're not going to cut as deep in those programs because of the ripple effect they have on other important human dignity and human livelihood questions, and Oregon Housing and Community Services was one of them. In related areas, after the first attempt to fund the Healthy Kids program was defeated at the ballot box with a $13 million campaign by the tobacco companies, I didn't just say, okay, we tried it once, we're going to give up. I came back as majority leader in the House and negotiated a different approach to the funding. I brought in representatives of the hospitals, representatives of insurance companies, advocates for children's health. And we spent months negotiating something that we could get the votes to pass in the House, the votes to pass in the Senate, and the governor approved. And it provided health insurance to 80,000 kids in Oregon, 12,000 of them in Portland, that didn't have it before. That's the kind of result we need that goes beyond good ideas.
Thank you, Representative Nolan. This question is back to you.
Okay.
This is question number 5, if you're keeping track. What policies would you pursue so that there are sufficient affordable housing and employment opportunities in order for low-income families to continue to live within the city of Portland?
I'm having a hard time understanding how this is different on the affordable housing part than questions we have already addressed. So I'm going to spend most of my time on the employment options. Along with spending time, as I mentioned earlier, visiting with nonprofit housing organizations, private housing developers, and advocates for housing, I have also spent a lot of my time visiting with small and mid-sized business owners. And I'm asking them a similar question to what I've asked the housing advocates. What do you need? What service or policy changes do you need that will make it more likely that in the next year you can expand your workforce here in Portland? The city of Portland only employs less than 6,000 people in Portland. There are 250,000 jobs in Portland, and that's 250,000 people who need those jobs. So we have to make it inviting and enticing for people to invest in businesses to meet demand and hire Portlanders to do that. And they come back and tell me interesting things. Rarely do they say, give us more tax breaks. And frankly, I expected that. And after the first 10 conversations I had and that didn't come back, I was a bit stunned. But I saw a pattern. Invest in education. Early childhood education, K-12, community colleges. I'm so glad to hear that part of their answer. And so what have I done with that? When I was co-chair of the Ways and Means Committee, I passed the largest ever K-12 budget. I doubled the amount of money going into college scholarships. And I made sure they were available for the first time ever to community college students who went to college part-time. That makes a difference. It prepares people for work. And then if there are jobs available, we have a robust economy.
Thank you. Amanda Fritz?
People need to be able to live close to where they work. And so that is a policy that we need to look at. Where is affordable housing available, and particularly where is good quality rental housing available. I was the Community Alliance of Tenants Low-Income Housing Champion in 2009, and it's one of my favorite organizations because they support people who are struggling to stay in place and deal with landlords who are not following the rules and provide that support, which certainly we at the city can sometimes add a little nudge now and again. That's what I certainly will continue to do. We need to recognize that people need to be able to get to work, so focusing on TriMet and encouraging them to look at expanding their payroll, their funding source, so that they're not so reliant on the payroll tax, which has not worked well during the recession. So we have buses that are completely packed, in fact sometimes leaving people at the bus stop because there's no room for people to get on, at the same time as we've not dealt with that issue of how do we fund TriMet. So there's been a reluctance on the TriMet board, who none of them, I understand, actually use the bus, to look at how do regular working people get from A to B. And that's something that this council, our council, has certainly focused on, especially with regard to students getting to their high school, which is a significant burden on low-income families if you not only have to get yourself to your job, but then get your children to high school on the TriMet bus. So we have fought time and again over the last 4 years for maintaining the free student bus program, and I will continue to do that. Again, it was something that I got involved at as a community advocate when the Sisters in Action for Power started advocating at Jefferson High School, and then they were able to get half-price bus passes. The Multnomah Youth Commission then got it across the system, and I will continue to be a big advocate for properly funding TriMet.
Thank you. Charlie Hales?
Let me focus also on the employment piece, because we have talked a fair amount already about the housing side, more to come. But first and foremost, just being an advocate for and using the city's leverage for family wage jobs. I'm really pleased to have the support of a number of labor organizations, not just the plumbers and electricians and carpenters and operating engineers on the construction side, but the Service Employees International Union and the United Food and Commercial Workers, people that make $12, $13 an hour thanks to a union contract. So having more family wage jobs in this city so people can afford housing is part of our strategy, and the city can do things to increase the leverage for those jobs to be available in our community. Secondly, education, school-to-work partnerships. There's this great organization called the Portland Workforce Alliance. It's trying to connect kids in our school system to the manufacturing jobs that we have in this city, because we still have a manufacturing base here, and that workforce is aging, and we need new technically competent workers coming into, again, those family wage jobs. A lot of support for small business. I don't have time in this answer to go into everything, but I hope you'll go to my website and look at Community Credit Portland, which is an idea that I've floated to use the money that the city banks every year to help leverage loans for local small businesses. A radical idea that they've been doing in that wild and crazy place, North Dakota, for 95 years with the State Bank of North Dakota. So I think we should do that here in Portland. I've also proposed that we have a strong buy local, buy Oregon policy for the goods and services that the city buys to, again, keep the prosperity here. And finally, I've also recommended that we give a city business income tax break to B corporations, socially responsible corporations that go far beyond the requirements of law, because they take on a lot of social costs that then we don't have to. So those kind of progressive policies in our city, I think, can leverage more living wage jobs, people that can then afford housing, at least more of them.
Thank you. I'll repeat the question for Jefferson Smith. What policies would you pursue so that there are sufficient affordable housing and employment opportunities in order for low-income families to continue to live inside the city of Portland?
So we've covered a lot about housing. I will add a little bit about jobs. I think one of the things at stake in this race, and that we need to have a broader conversation about if we have the opportunity in the next 20 days, is what is our economic strategy going forward. We talked about tax breaks already. I sit on the House Transportation Economic Development Committee. I'm happy to do it. There's some interesting ideas pitched. A huge portion of the ideas that are pitched could be categorized in some fashion, certainly a tax break, in some fashion, a boondoggle. The economic development plan that has been lobbied by many of the most powerful elements of our city over the last year since I've been running for mayor include coal trains going through the city, a casino that is no longer happening, a highway interchange project at Clark County, deregulating various things to make it easier to build industrial land outside the city, fee giveaways to developers. This is not a 21st century or a Portland, Oregon worthy jobs plan. That we need an economic philosophy, strategy, and set of steps that are worthy of our town and worthy of the future. Let's talk about some of them. It does include work for, and happy to hear Charlie join me in calling for an amplification of our work readiness and education. Not only the Workforce Alliance, also partnerships with ACE Academy and Work Systems, Inc., trying to give a lot more young people access to work training. Summer programs has been one of the top 3 priorities in our campaign since about the beginning of our campaign. Next, infrastructure choices that are worthy of Portland in this century. That means not just big bridges we can't afford. That means retrofitting public buildings for energy efficiency and public safety. We got a baby start at that in the legislature with the Cool Schools bill. And it also means a greater focus on early stage and smaller businesses. Neighborhood Prosperity Initiative, the economic gardening stuff we're talking about, and maybe we'll talk about jobs more.
Thank you. In fact, you get a chance to talk about jobs right now. This question, though, is asks all the candidates to focus your attention on specific populations. So starting with Charlie Hales, the question for all of you is, what will you do to ensure employment and economic opportunities for our most vulnerable populations, including individuals with disabilities, people with long periods of disconnection from the labor market, and folks with legal and criminal histories? Charlie Hales, you have 2 minutes to respond.
My first thought on that question again is we manage to succeed on those kinds of difficult issues, usually not by the direct role of city government, but usually by working through very effective nonprofits. I was at Central City Concern earlier this week meeting with their staff to get an update on what they're doing. Their ability to move people out of homelessness and in many cases out of addiction and into transitional housing, and then on into the workforce, and similar with transition projects and other nonprofits in this city. The sophistication and the capability of these nonprofits is a huge community asset for us. So I think the smartest thing that those of us in the room, if I'm in the room, of the city council chambers on these issues is to know that we're not the smartest people in the room, that there is amazing expertise and sophistication and ability in these nonprofits. Jean DeMaster has forgotten more about how to get people into housing than I will probably ever learn. So we have treasures in this community like her and like a lot of you here who know how to do this work. So I think we have succeeded as a city on this front to the extent that we have. We have a lot more to do. We have 1,700 people sleeping on the street tonight, so we're far from there yet. But to the extent that we're succeeding, and to the extent that the 10-year plan is making progress on homelessness, and that we've succeeded in creating a lot of affordable housing in this city, it's mostly because we've been smart enough to partner with very capable nonprofits. So I'm not dodging the question, except that I know they know more than I do. And I will always remember that and look for ways for the city to use what dollars we have and what policies we have to leverage their success. And I think that's our formula, varied in a dozen different ways by a dozen different organizations.
Thank you. Jefferson Smith, you have 2 minutes to answer.
Same question. Oh, it's the job stuff again.
Let me repeat though. It's jobs. It's the question about economic opportunity for very vulnerable populations, including people with disabilities, people with criminal records, people who have been disconnected from the labor market for a long time.
Job training is something we can do more of. We talked a little bit about that. There is a proposal, and it's one of the few I've seen, unfortunately, to allow recently returning felons, to facilitate recently returning felons into the workforce by providing tax breaks to the companies that do it. I'm open to that idea at the state or local level, but I have to reiterate my reticence with tax breaks generally. We got to see if we can find other tools. Another, we should look for things like the Gateway Education Center. And one of the proposals that has come forward is to include within that industrial kitchen that allows somebody who wants to make things for a local farmer's market a place to do that at scale and within code, whether it's somebody making tamales or somebody building skills so that they can work in a restaurant later. Helping facilities like this very one. We also should be thinking about infrastructure opportunities, making sure those include training opportunities within them. I also support and am glad for the city's recent work around community benefit agreements to at least address wage standards. But beyond that, I know that all of those added up, plus whatever next 3 ideas I will offer, won't be near enough. And therefore, I don't want to criticize Charlie's answer, but join it and say that ultimately I will not offer the best answer, but I hopefully my ears will function.
Thank you. Amanda Fritz?
I started the Office of Equity and Human Rights to address the issue of opportunity for everyone in city contracts, city jobs, and city services. And I'm really happy that it has gone from being a concept that Mayor Adams announced in February of 2011. It was met with almost universal derision and people saying, why don't you use that money to fill potholes that would give jobs and improve our infrastructure? To now it's at the point where it's clearly so successful that both of the mayoral candidates have said that they will keep it in their portfolio. You did. Let the record show that Jefferson understood from the beginning its importance, and I appreciate that very much. Regardless of whether they do end up keeping it after the time that they've said that they're going to keep all of the bureaus, I will continue to be the champion and the detail-oriented person who will make sure that the Equity Office work is successful. One of the major things, the wonderful things that we've done with the Equity Office is including the Commission on Disability as part of the services provided and the support provided by the staff there. And the Commission on Disabilities has embraced the equity work. So the very first ordinance that we passed in the Office of Equity and Human Rights was to become a model employer of people with disabilities. And we are studying about that strategically, and we will make sure that that happens. The Commission on Disabilities has 33 different stakeholder groups that are represented there, including people with mental illnesses. And that's the second piece where I really want to be on the council for the next 4 years. We need to provide better services for people with mental illnesses because we know that otherwise our police and our firefighters are providing first response in the community, and we've had some really bad outcomes. So we need to provide funding for the National Alliance for Mental Illness North Star House for Folk Time, and we need to coordinate with the hospitals and the healthcare system to make sure that with Central City Concern and others that we are actually providing care for people who need it so that they can get housing and then get jobs.
Commissioner Fritz, assuming that the city can only provide limited employment to some of these vulnerable populations, what do you think you as a city commissioner can do to increase employment across the board in the city of Portland for some of these vulnerable populations?
Our intent is to show that actually it's not that hard. And what I have found with the people with disabilities who are employed in my bureaus in the city is that they are some of the most productive and dedicated workers. They face difficulties every day, and they are used to overcoming them. So, and the accommodations that are required are not that expensive and not that difficult. So I think there's been a tendency in the past to look at what can't be done, and now we're going to be looking at what can be done. If we do it, the whole concept, well, not the whole concept, but part of the concept behind the Office of Equity and Human Rights, city needs to put its own house in order first before we go out into the community and start looking at the education districts and others as to what else needs to be done in the community. We will be learning from others who've been advanced in this work already. Certainly some of the corporations are way ahead of us in understanding that people with disabilities are very much prized employees and should be valued for that.
Thank you. Mary Nolan?
So if you've been listening, and it's okay if you haven't been, it won't surprise you that I'm going to talk about tangible results and address the specific 3 groups that the question wants addressed. People with disabilities, people who are long-term unemployed, and people releasing from prisons. For people with disabilities, for all of these actually, but particularly for people with disabilities, we need to get very quickly beyond lofty words and more studies. We need to get to the point where we have measurable objectives that move the dial, that get more people employed, and then hold people accountable to deliver those results. And that's the way I will approach any bureau that I have stewardship over on the City Council. With long-term unemployed, I had the privilege of chairing the Private Industry Council in Portland that was specifically working on helping long-term unemployed secure work. And we partnered with Portland Community College, with apprenticeship programs, with workforce training programs to help people get the skills they need and set up opportunities for them to interview with local employers because we had helped those local employers be in a position to expand their workforce. I'll bring that experience, that success to City Hall and either do it directly or help one of my colleagues who's responsible for it know how to use that model. and with people emerging from prison. And let's remember, 98% of the people currently in an Oregon prison will one day, some of them very soon, come and live in an Oregon community. As co-chair of the Public Safety Committee, I invested in job training programs, in parenting programs, in transition programs to help these people be successful for themselves and not recidivate, so that the communities they come back to are safe as well.
Thank you. Is everybody doing okay out there? You okay? Everybody's still awake and live and happy? So now we get a little break here from the questions, and this is
a halftime show.
I know this is you are the halftime show.
And don't ask me to sing the anthem. I can promise you, with this voice, you don't want to hear it.
So this is the time where the candidates get to make their 2-minute statements for you. This is sort of the midterm statement rather than the opening statement. And so we'll start again with Mary Nolan and move to Amanda Fritz, then Jefferson Smith, then Charlie Hales. Each candidate has 2 minutes to make a statement. Mary Nolan.
I think this is actually a nice format because we've had some substance to the conversation, and the pitch, I think, has more impact because we've already talked about very specific issues, and you've had a chance to see the differences among us. And I think you've also seen some commonality, which is a fabulous thing for Portland, that we're all committed to improving in affordable housing and access to jobs.
Or are we?
But I'd like to point out that what I've focused on, and what I have focused on in the legislature as well as here tonight, in my public service management career and in my private business, small business owner career, is results. I like to use data. I like to make good decisions. And having good data and a discussion to form that goal is important. But I'm really driven by getting outcomes. I'm driven by tangible changes that really improve people's lives. 80,000 kids having health insurance, several thousand patients in assisted living facilities having the support from the state to be able to stay in good care. Thousands of community college and university students having access to college funding college scholarships that they didn't have before. I don't measure myself on what I promise. I measure myself on what I've done. And I invite you as voters to look at the track records, stack up the results, and judge people on what they've done as an indicator of what we're capable of doing. That's what I want to do for you on the City Council, and I'd love your support.
Thank you. Amanda Fritz?
I'm originally from England, in case anybody is wondering where the very strange accent is from. I came here when I was 21 years old because I had met the love of my life working at a Salvation Army children's camp in New Jersey. And so the day after I graduated from college, I came to see if I could catch him, and I did. So that was nice. We lived for 7 years below the poverty line, and I was a renter first in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then in Rochester, New York. And we chose to live in Rochester where my husband went to medical school in a very low-income neighborhood because that was the cheapest place, and we wanted to get through medical school with the minimum amount of debt, I worked all the hours that there were available, and we got out of medical school with a debt of $13,000, which we then paid off within 4 years. And I feel very lucky about that. But we lived in a neighborhood where the corner store owner kept a shotgun on the counter. That was really startling to me as somebody from England where they don't have guns. The island of Great Britain is about the same size as Oregon, and there are 56 million people that live there. There are fewer people living outside in the United Kingdom than there are in the city of Portland. And that's partly because the tax structure is really different, and partly because the social structure is really different. Part of what I love about Portland is that we care about people, we care about our neighbors, and we truly take to heart that we love our neighbors as ourselves. That's what I've done on the Portland City Council. I used to go in the Fifth Avenue door of City Council. I now choose to go in through the Fourth Avenue because there are people there protesting our lack of housing, and so that I can at least say good morning, talk to folks, and that was one of the reasons that I was interacting with Cameron Whitten during his hunger strike and was able to work with him to resolve that. I worked with folks on the sidewalk management plan where we were looking at how do people exist downtown Portland. And so but we didn't, once we had done that, stop meeting. I hold meetings every other month where people who live outside, business owners, police, can come and talk with each other, and I'm there so that they talk respectfully and so that we move forward together as a community. That's the kind of commissioner that you elected 4 years ago. I hope you'll do it again.
Thank you. Jefferson Smith?
I'm running for mayor because it's my hometown, and I think we can make it better. I serve in the legislature now. I ran a successful nonprofit. I have put the last 10 years of my life into nonprofit and electoral public service. When you wind down, you realize there's 20 days left for this conversation. It gets even more focusing about what I recognize as the differences, where I hope we will continue this conversation beyond the next 20 days. To maintain consistency, I'll say I'm in this race to get the city working better for more people. To get more specific, and particularly where some of the differences are, what is our philosophy? What are our plans? What are our specific objectives with respect to job development? I think we need an economic development plan that fits our city. Not just tax breaks and boondoggles, not just fee giveaways, not just bridge projects, not only we can't afford, but we should not afford. But how can we think about cultivating homegrown businesses and smaller businesses, which is where most of the job growth is coming from? Politicians talk a very good game about this every single 4 years. But if you look at where most of the tax breaks go, that's not where nearly enough of our economic and political energy go. Second, getting our city working for more people and working better. So last year, I think 49% of Portlanders were either satisfied or very satisfied with government services. One of our objectives will be getting that north of 60% towards our 5-year high. How can we do some of that? We want to learn from Liesel's good work and have a single 311 system lying alongside a 211 system, as New York has done, for all non-emergency government phone calls. And then also having our city working for more people. There's never been a mayor elected this side of 80th, and it shows. Ultimately, we've got to think about who's going to be in charge of this city. And I don't mean me or him. I mean the people in this room or the people in other rooms.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Charlie Hales?
You know, I'm a hands-on guy. I like to dig in and start working on the problem. My wife, Nancy, who's here, says I should campaign through this office in a tool belt. And that would be appropriate because that's how I learned about issues of housing inequity. Put myself through college as a construction framer. And we were building mostly farmers' home houses, which was a program in the Department of Agriculture to help low-income rural people buy their first home. And I can still see the light in the eyes of those families moving into that first home. I also learned about equity at that time because my friend Elwood Samuels, who worked with me, kept buying bricks every payday, 200 at a time in a bag of mortar. And I finally asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm building a house." And I asked him, "Why are you building it that way, 200 bricks at a time?" And he said, and this was in 1970s in Virginia, he said, "Charlie, a black man can't get a loan for a house in Fredericksburg, Virginia." And I learned about equity on the same job. And I still remember both the light in their eyes and the injustice of what Elwood faced. Now, looking forward, I see a city where we can, hands-on together, take on some of those issues and make sure that every kid in Portland goes to a good neighborhood school. Make sure there are more family wage jobs in this city. Make sure that we have an increased trust between our police bureau and our citizens, something else that I want to work on, hands-on. And make sure that there are more basic services in neighborhoods all around us that don't have streets that get those kids to the side, to their school, or even sidewalks that they can walk safely to school on. This is a job that requires the ability to hands-on bring people together and get things done, and that's what I'm good at. And that's why I think the partnerships that we build in this room and others are so important to the future of this city. Thank you.
Thank you. This is another question that focuses on some specific populations. Commissioner Fritz, you're first. What policies should the City of Portland pursue in order to reduce barriers to housing and service access for communities of color and immigrants and refugees? You have 2 minutes to respond.
Clearly, as an immigrant, I know it's sometimes challenging even for somebody who speaks English as my first language to negotiate some of the differences in the system here. So for folks who have different first languages, that can be even more challenging, and we are recognizing as part of the work of the Office of Equity and Human Rights that we need to provide more translation services. The legislative agenda study that I mentioned earlier this year, we had not only Spanish and Somali translation, but also American Sign Language, so that more people could participate in government meetings and in government programs. The Office of Equity and Human Rights currently houses the New Orleans program. When Mayor Carter set that up, it was envisioned to be an entire Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, and they're looking for funding for it, so it was put into the Office of Human Relations, which has now grown into the Office of Equity. I will be having a conversation with the next mayor to discuss is that a good location for those services, or would we do better having a separate Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs within the mayor's office, or as a standalone, so that we can make sure that we have over 80 different immigrant and refugee communities in Portland, and each is different, even within particular communities, just like within this community right here, and perhaps within any family, there's a lot of different individuals who have different opinions and different needs. We need to continue to look at individuals and people rather than labels and making assumptions. And again, we need to make sure that it's nothing about us, that we bring people to the table and we give the people most affected the choices and the voices to help decide how we move forward as a city.
Thank you. Representative Nolan?
Three things come to mind immediately, and I think they're really important. The first one is, and we've begun to start work on this, but I think we really need to spend a lot more work on it. And that is, we have to be willing to look in the mirror. We have to be willing to admit our own personal prejudices and the prejudice and racism that exists in the city. Because if we can't name it, we really can't address it successfully. And Portland dances around this issue in ways that I think are shameful to those of us. Myself, having to admit, I'm not perfect on this. Even though my daughter's Latina, I still have work to do. So owning up to prejudices that we have and that exist in the community and facing them with real intent. Second is working authentically to support micro businesses, making sure we don't do things either intentionally or more likely inadvertently that undermine business ownership for local people, particularly people in the communities of color. Because business ownership is how people develop the wealth to be successful and the ability to own homes, send their kids to college, and thrive in this community. And the last one is the city should stop practices that break up communities. Investments we've made, I'm pretty sure they were inadvertent, but they were inattentive as well, have divided up traditional neighborhoods and communities and isolated people in ways that end up disempowering communities. And we need to make sure we understand the effects of those practices and make sure we change them, root them out of everything we do.
Thank you. Can you say one specific thing that has to do with either housing or access to public services and how the city might improve those for communities of color or immigrant refugee people?
I think I did.
How
If you don't have the income to afford housing, whether it's rental or ownership, that puts you out of the access to housing. So I think support for economic opportunities, and particularly an ability to develop, to grow your wealth in your state that allows you to get into housing, is a direct response to how we can help communities of color address access to housing.
Thank you. Jefferson, could you repeat the question? Okay. What policies should the city of Portland pursue in order to reduce barriers to housing and services for communities of color and immigrants and refugees?
First, I want to describe a typical attack. Typical attack of any politician. The pressure to do this is remarkable, and I am not immune to it. Is to go from room to room and know that if you can say a thing or two things that will appeal to that room, you can get some share of these folks to vote, volunteer, or donate. If you can rinse and repeat that, you got a good chance of everything. And what you hope is that those promises will add up to a strategic plan, and you hope that strategic plan will add up to a budget. This is how we do it. What we're trying to do at our best is something mildly different, which is look at our top core priorities and apply each of our most important values to those priorities. For the last 13 months, we've been working to get the city working better for more people. Our values for the last 13 months have been prosperity, sustainability, equity, and democracy. Now, when we look at our jobs plan, small business jobs plan, yes, hopefully it helps everybody, particularly it helps lower income, newer, and business owners of color who are disproportionately small business owners. We want to get the city working better for everyone. The 311 system would make it work better for everyone, particularly for neighborhoods like the ones studied in Seattle, which had more streetlights out. In part, it had more streetlights out because people in that neighborhood felt less comfortable calling the city. We're less likely to have a friend who is a city planner. We're less likely to speak the language of the person on the other side of the line. A 311 system that isn't just a telephone number, but a consolidated citizen service helps everybody, particularly people with less traditional access to power. Geographic equity. Recognizing that East Portland is a crisis and we have to do something about it. I think that helps everybody. It particularly helps the people who are speaking, I think now, 76 languages in the David Douglas School District. I have no time, but I welcome a follow-up question.
Charlie, I'll see you.
Yeah, let me mention 4 ways in which I think our community can become more culturally competent. And there are probably a lot more than 4, but we mention these in the time I have. First, public agencies and services themselves. There's a lot still to do to make sure that the value of equity that we enshrined in that office actually gets reflected in what the city does. I'll give you 2 very specific examples. The police bureau is hiring more officers of color. Good. But they're hiring them by hiring police officers that have been downsized out of California police agencies. So instead, we should be hiring police officers here from our own communities of color. And that will be obviously a benefit in a lot of ways. Secondly, an ordinance that I want to introduce is to require that if the city is leasing space in an office building, it ought to have represented workers cleaning the building. Because then we have janitors who have that protection of a union contract and make $12.45 or $13 an hour and aren't being left behind. Leadership development. Secondly, we should have culturally competent leadership development in the city to raise up a generation of leaders out of all of our communities in Portland to take this city forward after whichever group of us leads it for the next few years is done doing the next thing in our lives. PERCO and some other organizations in the city are doing that, and we need to hold it up and do more. The private sector needs to be asked to be more culturally competent. I didn't have anything to do with it, but I'm very proud of the fact that my company has internships for students of color to get exposed to engineering and planning, because that's something that every company should do. So let's have more private sector firms in Portland doing that. And then finally, even the physical development of the city. Paul Katalani told me about how Somali families are modifying their lifestyle to fit into apartment buildings that were never designed for the way they want to live. Why don't we build projects that reflect the cultural desires of the communities that are moving here and change our zoning to allow that? Those are 4 ways that I can think of.
Thank you. That's it down there again. Charlie else? How would you defend the rights of poor and homeless people to use our public spaces? 2 minutes and answer.
I was actually on the city council when we approved that radical idea of Dignity Village, and it has worked.
First is to consider our mindset. That question is asked very often, almost always in the inverse. Usually is asked, how will you make sure our streets are more scrubbed and free of dirty people? They didn't use that language. The last time I heard being asked, they said vagrants. And what I hope that we will do is change our mindset a little bit, somewhere in between the way that question is framed and the way the question is usually framed. And that means also practical solutions, not just thinking about a vision of how we can make the streets empty so that someone will take the street and walk down them without feeling offended and go home. But rather, making sure there's enough eyes on the street, law-abiding citizens, so that everybody feels safe, because everybody is safe. And that includes street percentage. And that includes doing the things that, like Sergeant John Scruggs did on 162nd and Burnside, the hottest hotspot of crime, I think, in the region at the time, when they did a silly idea of piping classical music on that tax platform. And he got teased. It cost about $3,000. And according to an 8-month pilot, apparently reduced service calls by, I think, 58%. To police officers with equipment, training, salary, and benefits, $250,000. Think about environmental changes we can make to make streets inviting for that family from Lake Oswego and from people who can't afford a home there, or even afford a home here. Second, we can think about what happens and how we will proceed when crises and big questions come. And here I won't just talk about what I will do and what I have done. And one of the things I did do, or didn't do, was call for the forcible authorization, forcible removal of the occupied camps in the first week or two of their arrival. I didn't think it was practical. I didn't think it was right. We've got to find some balance.
Thank you. Manfred? I'm very proud of what I've done on sidewalk management. When it came up in May of 2010, I think it was, the previous ordinance was going to sunset, but we didn't have anything else that we had a discussion about because we were busy with the second really difficult recession budget. And so we extended it until September. And over the course of that summer, I led a public process in collaboration with Commissioner Fish to bring people together to talk about the issues of sharing public spaces downtown. Honoring freedom of speech, honoring freedom of assembly, and respecting that businesses need to be able to operate and people need to be able to come downtown. Because it is largely an issue on downtown sidewalks. So we held a meeting at Kaiser Town Hall where 75 people came on the day that it was 100 degrees and with no air conditioning. And we held a meeting at the First Unitarian Church where 10 to 15 people came. And I set up the microphone at the front and said, where do I sign up for my 3 minutes? And I said, that's not what we're doing. We had volunteers from Resolutions Northwest, and we asked people to break up into table groups for 10 to 15. We asked them not to sit with the people that they came with. And instead of talking at each other, we listened to each other. And by the time we then had our gathering together at the end of the evening, we had people coming to the microphone saying, I'm a business owner. I just met John. He became homeless because he had a medical emergency and lost his house. I understand that he needs somewhere to be. And we had others say, I just met Mary. She has a business downtown. I understand that she pays taxes that help pay for my services. So we started that process of how do we share downtown sidewalks. And as I mentioned in the previous response, we didn't leave it there. We kept meeting, and in fact, it has been a successful ordinance that most people feel has helped. It hasn't solved the problems, but there hasn't been a disparate number of citations on warning given to folks, and it has given people's places to speak. Would you please ask my follow-up question?
And what else?
Because I want to give a specific example of what happened this last month. We started off meeting monthly to check the statistics, to look at the data to see are people being unfairly targeted. And what happens is the police, people who live outside, business owners, social services advocates, and myself, we meet every month with a facilitator who's able to get people to talk to each other. And there's often a lot of anger because the police officers are there, people feel like they've been discriminated against and such. And indeed, but we decided after a year or so that things were going pretty well and we didn't need to meet so often, but the people in the group said we want to keep meeting. It's pretty much the only time that variety of folks gets to meet face-to-face with the city commissioner. Whoever wants to show up shows up at that particular time. So this last month, It started in somebody who advocates for people living outside, talking about a new challenge that we have on Southwest Oak around 3rd Street, where there's some of the traveling youth have been very aggressively panhandling, making even people who normally go downtown feel very, very uncomfortable. But it was a concern from one of the advocates that the police had been unfairly targeting them, and it started off with that clashing. By the time we got to the end of the afternoon, we again had somebody who lives outside saying that these particular traveling youth were problematic for people who live around outside year-round, that their aggressive panhandling was impacting others who are respectful, and somebody says, no, they don't ask them when they come out of the store as well as going back in. So we didn't get to a solution, but we got to a shared understanding of the problem, and there aren't simple solutions to many of the challenges we face today, and we don't have enough money to fix all of them. What we can do is show people respect and collectively recognize that we have a problem and we do have solutions. Let's figure it out together.
Thank you. Representative Nolan, you can take a little extra time if you'd like.
We'll see. First of all, getting down to the humanity, shared humanity, and a respect for the dignity of everyone. I'm sorry, Representative Smith, that you're hearing derogatory comments about people in the reverse form of this question. Pushing back on that is something we all need to do, and I know you do. But really understanding and connecting on a human level. Looking at people in their eyes and smiling, asking them how their day is going. Won't earth-shatteringly change things, but it informs me as much as it lightens their heart, I think. I've been a lifelong defender of free speech, the right to assemble, protest. I grew up in Chicago. My parents knew Jesse Jackson, and we marched with him in Operation Push. My parents packed all 6 of us in the camper and drove to Washington, D.C. to protest the Vietnam War. Gives you a clue of how old I am. I've attended countless rallies here in Portland to join people advocating for social justice and women's health and better education and access to opportunities. I believe profoundly in those rights, and as a result, I have the very best voting track record by ACLU in the legislature for the last 5 terms, because I put that into action. I stand up when I'm the only person voting against a bill, because I know it's wrong. But finally, I think we want to put most of our energy into making this a rare occasion, a rare event, so that people don't need to be sleeping on the sidewalk, don't need to be sitting on the sidewalk begging for food, because they have better options. We've talked about that a lot. But while we want to protect people's rights, dignity, and opportunities, I think we want to give them something better and really work on making sure we're dedicated to that. And that's where I am.
Thank you. This is a long question, but I'm going to ask for a short answer. It's actually a yes/no question, so I think we can answer it in 1 minute. We're going to start with Charlie Hales and then with the Commissioner. So the question is, the current City Council this year adopted a budget note that committed to moving $4.8 million in one-time Housing Bureau safety net funding into ongoing funding over the next 2 budget cycles. Are you committed to implementing this directive, even in the face of expected budget challenges? You have 1 minute.
Yes, I'm familiar with that budget note and the direction that the city's trying to take in our support.
Thank you. Jefferson Smith.
I agree with the direction. The area has typically don't make budget promises, so I'm not going to promise to take almost any dime that I would care about and advocate for America.
Thank you. And then Fritz.
Yes, I helped get the budget note adopted, and I will certainly support it.
Thank you. Mary Ellen.
Yes.
Wow, that was awesome. So we're on to question 11. to answer it because it actually asks for some exposition on your part. Starting with Jefferson Smith. Recent data demonstrates that poverty and to a significant extent our communities of color have become more concentrated in outer East Portland, where there are often fewer critical public services and private amenities. Some of this relocation is being driven by the housing market because rents are most affordable in those parts of the county. Also, landlords in those areas are more likely to accept tenants who are using public rental subsidies. What should your top 3 policy priorities be with regard to addressing these disparities? You have 2 minutes to answer.
First is seeing the whole city when we do zoning. This isn't just something that happened and got done. When in the 1990s, led by the other candidate, the mayor, pushing a bunch of infill housing in East Portland without, number 2, a commitment, or at least, certainly the same commitment to things like streets, sidewalks, and parks. We've got to make sure that when we are zoning and planning, we see the whole city. Second, amenities. I want to applaud Commissioner Fish for working on the E205 initiative, working to get things like expanded parks in East Portland, including one that is about to break ground and just had a celebration 2 weekends ago. And I hugely appreciate that work. We've also got to make sure we're doing sidewalks and streets. And then third, looking for catalytic investments, things like the Gateway Education Center, things like the work that Mercy Court Northwest is trying to do with Community Real Estate Investment Trust, like adaptive and improved Lenz Town Center, to try to make sure that we're building economic diversity within East Portland. 3B. 3B. Also looking at school investments, recognizing we do have 6 school districts, 4 of them in East Portland, and they're getting bigger. And we've got to make sure that we're advocating for at least a conversation about what the relationship could be between Portland Public Schools and David Douglas and Park Rose, to say nothing is significant.
Thank you. Charlie Hills with 2 minutes to answer.
Yeah, 3, first, work on barriers to housing choice citywide. That make sure that we're trying to create complete communities across the city so that we have affluent and middle class and lower income people across the city. So, investing in housing opportunity in economically strong neighborhoods, like the requirement that we put in place in the Pearl District and the South Waterfront for 25% affordable housing. I'm proud of having been part of that negotiation. We want that. We want lower income people living in Hillsdale and in the Pearl District, not just in East Portland. So remove the barriers in the rest of the city. As I mentioned earlier, the second piece of that is the Section 8 reforms that I want to help support in the next session of the legislature that Representative Kotek, hopefully Speaker Kotek, will be leading, and we'll be working with her as a coalition to get that passed. Third, infrastructure in East Portland, as I mentioned a couple of times, is a priority of mine. And, it's easy to criticize the fact that we haven't continuously built parks in East Portland, but I'm very proud of the fact that I got the first ever community center built east of 82nd Avenue at the the East Portland Community Center. And we built 5 parks: John Louis, Lincoln, Knott, Ed Benedict, and Earl Wells. So I'm pretty proud of the fact that under my leadership, we started making good on the deficit of parks in East Portland. And Commissioner Fish has rightly identified the roadmap to the rest, and I'll support a bond measure, which we can do at minimal cost to the taxpayers, because the one that I passed is about to pay off its bonds. So let's get on with the work, and he's got a good plan for doing it. When it comes to streets and sidewalks, I think we do need to mount a citywide initiative to start building out this deficit of unbuilt streets and sidewalks. Waiting for low-income people living on the street to tax themselves to build the improved street is not an effective strategy. At our current rate of progress using that tool, we'll get it all done in about 2,000 years. So I want to see a citywide capital program committed to building that out over 20 years.
Thank you. Representative Norland, you have 2 minutes to answer.
This essentially calls the question of whether we are one city. And I think our answer needs to be yes. And in particular, I would echo some of the comments that have already been made. In the older part of Portland, the original part of Portland, we benefited from some generosity, some philanthropy, from people who donated land for parks, and the city then invested in improving that. We streets, sidewalks, street lighting, and make sure we partner with TriMet to make sure that the transit services in East Portland are up to the par of the rest of the city. And we have to ask the rest of the city to make an investment in that. Existing property owners, a little share. New development, a pretty big share. The rest of the city chipping in some portion of it as well. And I think we can put that combination together. And finally, the city has an opportunity to assure that there is a critical mass of investment to support private businesses in East Portland for jobs that go beyond just service jobs, to include manufacturing jobs and other middle-class jobs so that people can take care of themselves and take care of their children and build a life here in Portland.
Thank you. Amanda?
I voted for the East Portland Action Plan very early in my tenure on the City Council, and it's still one of the most memorable hearings held at the Midland Library with the community there. I love representing the whole city. I do not want to go to district form of government. I live in deep southwest Portland, in an area that was annexed in 1979. It has a lot more in common with East Portland than it does with some other parts of southwest Portland. It has the only Title I school on the west side. And when I first started getting involved in community organizing, it was very clear to me that the challenges I faced in West Portland Park, with lack of parks, lack of sidewalks, lack of any kind of modern infrastructure, almost. We have one sidewalk in West Portland Park, it's really nice. Were much more common with us in East Portland. So I started working with folks here long before it was fashionable to do so. My parents-in-law lived in Sherwood Village, and so it's now actually my home as well. That's something I care deeply about. The East Portland Action Plan grew also to East Portland in Motion. I've been the champion for both of those. So I watch out to make sure that it's previously had been special appropriations, and I can keep putting it back into the budget when it maybe got missed. And this last time I advocated to making sure that we kept the staff person as well as the grant funding. Because you can have some great plans, if you don't have the staff and the funding to be able to implement them, they just sit on the shelf. That's something that the council has past 4 years has been very determined is not going to happen. That when we spend time on a study, that we invest also in its implementation and its actions. And so I think the East Portland Action Plan is a wonderful example of that. I'll continue to be its champion, continue to work on issues in East Portland.
Thank you. This is the final question before we move to closing statements. Actually, I think we can also do this question in 1 minute. So, you'll each have 1 minute to answer, starting with Charlie Hales. Given that everybody here seems to have seen the Housing Bureau to Commissioner Fish, the question before you is, given that, how will you assign leadership and approach communication in your own office on housing and human services issues? Starting with Charlie Hales.
Well, there's a larger question here, and that is how our weird form of government works under the mayor's leadership. And that is, although there's been some good work done, including by commissioners in this room in the last few years, our commission form of government tends to deteriorate into 5 little mayors who are lords of their own turf. That's its downside. It has some good things about it. I agree with you, Commissioner. It's good that our form of government requires each of us to represent the whole city. But we have to do that with respect to our bureaus as well. So one of the things I'll do if I'm your mayor is I will assign all the bureaus to myself, including the ones that are held by incumbent commissioners for the first 3 months. And we'll look at our situation as a city by comparing our budgets with those of our partners, Multnomah County, for example, and TriMet. And we will act as a body of the whole when we do that budget. And we'll do that periodically on major issues as well. Have the whole council sit in informal session to deliberate on a big and important strategy like housing, rather than only deferring to the commission in charge. It's important to have that counterbalance against the weakness of our form of government.
Thank you. Representative Smith?
Yeah, could you read the question again? If you reframe it, I don't understand.
The question is, given that you yourself said that you were not going to be the commissioner of housing, how would you track these issues in your own office and approach leadership and communication on housing and
start with a common plan with the housing commissioner, hopefully the rest of the council, on the objectives that we want to accomplish. And then have at least the top priority elements and strategies to accomplish those objectives agreed upon. Hopefully at least by the mayor and housing commissioner, hopefully also with some agreement with the remainder of the council. And then at the end of the year, certainly by the end of 18 months, to reevaluate and look at how well we do towards our objectives, and were we able to accomplish our strategies and rinse and repeat.
Thank you. Mayor?
We've worked very hard over the past 4 years to focus on making the commission form of government work better, and I'm proud of the way that we have done that. It was a part of being endorsed by Commissioner Fish and also by Commissioner Saltzman, the two will continue on the council for the next at least 2 years after this, and for a long time after that. So I mentioned earlier that I worked with Commissioner Fish on the tax abatement policy. I worked with Commissioner Saltzman on environmental services and super fund issues, and with the mayor on multiple planning issues. I meet with the planning director every month, and we meet with the director of the environmental services every month. It is entirely possible for adult responsible commissioners to collaborate and to allow their bureau directors to work with other commissioners. I directed the Office of Equity Director, Dante James, to be sure to meet on an ongoing basis with all other members of the council, because we need to make sure we are operating as one city, as one council, for the best interest of the people.
Thank you. Representative Nolan?
I have some pretty strong skills, but I don't have strong skills in every single thing that the city needs to provide and does provide for its citizens. And I am perfectly happy and effective working in a collaborative system, and I don't need to, want to, or able to be the most effective person on every single thing. So in this particular issue, I'm very happy to have a common conversation and set council agreed upon goals and objectives, provide resources to achieve them, provide some ongoing update and feedback on whether we're getting there, but leave to my fellow commissioners who are responsible for certain bureaus that I'm not responsible for to follow through on that. I am very supportive of an approach to the commission form of government that gets out of the 5 mayors approach, and instead we see our jobs as stewards of something that is accountable to the entire council, and by that way we'll be accountable to the entire city.
Thank you very much. Now comes time for our closing statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to say what they'd like to leave you with. We're going to start with the mayor candidate, starting with Jefferson Smith. You have 2 minutes.
Thanks for coming. I'm wanting to get the city working better for more people. We need to rethink and strengthen the best elements of our economic development plan. That's going to require more than the mayor. Infrastructure projects that are worthy of Portland in the future, and a greater focus on homegrown, early stage, and smaller business development. Second, improving satisfaction with government services. Finding ways to save money. That includes tax breaks and fee giveaways. That also includes big projects that we can't or shouldn't afford. It also includes increasing access to government through the 301 system and getting the city working for more people. Seeing the whole city when we budget, we're going to applaud the city council for moving towards budget mapping. We now need to move towards making sure those budget maps match our values and match our strategies. And what we're calling open summers, working on youth employment, on summer enrichment, working with county partners, private employers, to have one of the strongest summer enrichment youth employment programs in any major city in the country. That's what I'm hoping to bring to the office. I want to talk to them about you. Because ultimately the thing that I fear that is mildly eroding in our city is not that we fail to elect a decent succession of state liberals to the city council and to the mayor's office, which we do, but is the degree to which our citizenry is engaged in our decision making. The way a commission form of government works best is not merely because the mayor writes the right charge when it is time to delegate, or because even the right meetings are had between the commissioners. But when the citizens are most empowered, in the next 20 days, the next 10 seconds, I want to ask for that. For the people who come here, for it's not going to be your last or your second meeting, but your first to greater engagement in our city. And thanks for having us tonight.
Thank you. Charlie Hills?
Well, thanks very much for a good and thoughtful discussion and some really important questions that you raised with us tonight. Let me start by saying I'm really proud of the endorsements that I've gathered in this race, and they are nice to have. It is good to have the support of those working people in the labor organizations I mentioned, and all 4 newspapers who've endorsed so far in this race, the Oregonian, the Willamette Week, the Tribune, the Mercury endorsements. That's nice too. But when I think about issues of housing and equity, it's the endorsement of people that have been lions and lionesses on those issues that I value most of all. People like A.L. Gordley and Gretchen Kafori, who taught me so much about housing. We worked together, Gretchen and I, on a venture called the Liverpool City Housing Council. We tried out some ideas of mixed use, affordability, and even shared parking in places like the Belmont area. So again, I learned from her not just the importance of housing, but the way we work here, which is in partnership with other governments, like I did on getting light rail to the airport, or with the nonprofit sector, like we do on housing every day. And I think if leadership is courage and listening and then action by bringing people together, that I've learned those skills from those other leaders who have gone before me. And if you elect me as your mayor, I'll remember their guidance and yours, and we will work together for a shared future for a great city. Thanks for having us here tonight.
Thank you. Mary Nolan?
For all the flaws we've talked about tonight, Portland is a fabulous city to call home. And I've been lucky to be able to call it home for 36 years. I have benefited from what the people who were here before I was did to make it such a wonderful city. And I'm really driven to make it a wonderful city for the next 35 years and the 35 years after that. And while we've done some tough, really important things, rejecting a freeway in order to preserve housing, cleaning up our rivers, a good transit system, which we let slide a bit in recent years. We've talked tonight about really gripping challenges that we have to come to face and we have to solve. I'm very supportive of a collaborative approach, and I have a track record and reputation for building coalitions. But it takes real boldness to face our toughest challenges. It takes both the ability to listen to, really listen to and hear public input, but also the ability to lead the public just a little bit beyond their comfort zone to real social justice. Make sure they're ready to go there, but ask people to do more than what is simply easy. That's the approach I'll bring to City Hall, with your help and with your vote. Thanks.
Thank you. Amanda Fritz?
First, thank you for not asking about the F word, although that is definitely an equity issue. I'll talk to you later. Can't do that one. It's been a privilege to be your city commissioner for the last 4 years, and I ask for your vote again. I ask you to go to my website, amandatrencheswap.com, where I have listed not only what I've done for the past 4 years, but also specifics on what I intend to do for you for the next. I ask you to buy Sweeters tonight, because that also, we're more than happy to sell you the latest copy. It's a wonderful publication that I purchase regularly, more particularly it has a lot more information. These are complicated times, and these are complicated issues, and you've been very patient listening tonight. There's one issue that I haven't been able to catch on as much as I would like to, and that is the issue of mental health. I was a nurse working at psychiatry at OHSU for 22 years before I was elected to the City Council. We'll be having an announcement by the Department of Justice next Monday on how and what we must do to fix the problem of people with mental illnesses receiving unconstitutional levels of force from our police officers. We have 2 people currently employed by the City of Portland who are experts in mental health care, myself and Dr. Elizabeth Garrison, who works in the police bureau. It's crucial This is a problem that faces our entire city and our entire community. It's not who we want to be. Just like the Office of Equity was founded because we're not who we want to be. We're not providing equitable opportunities for everyone. We continue to discriminate based on color, based on disability and ability, based on the area of town that you live in. We've made some significant progress over the last 4 years, and in some ways the recession has pushed us to do this. Government can't do it all. Government shouldn't do it all. We need to do it in partnership and working together. That's the way I've operated in City Hall. That's my joy in being in City Hall, is knowing that we have to do it together and being part of that leadership so that I can be your voice in City Hall. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a privilege to be with you all this evening. Isn't it great to be in a room where democracy is working?
Thank you, Brittany Willis, for her excellent moderation. Thank you so much for the housing commissioners in the room tonight. So thank you.
These motherfuckers, man. These motherfuckers. Yeah.
Before we get to candidates, I'm a parent of an 18-year-old who just registered to vote, so it's been fun to watch the election through an 18-year-old's eyes, thinking of everything, trust me. But to watch their decision-making and the process of asking questions and the inquiry process for making their own decisions, not just following what their mom says. So it's been fun, and it's a good reminder that democracy is alive and well. So thank you for these 4 excellent candidates tonight. I really appreciate the dialogue, and it was very impressive response to what you said questions. So thank you to all of you for your time.
I'm blown away. I'm blown away by how many different ways you can say absolutely effing nothing. 4 different people showed us how to say nothing. That's 2 hours of my life I'll never get back.
Okay. This is out by the curb out at PCC, 82nd Avenue, and this is 99, and we had one good thing that I heard in there, and that was Amanda Fritz. I'll tell you guys when I get back down to the vigil. All right, you guys, I'll be there in about half an hour, so 8:30, Mary will be on. And I'll be down there and she'll debrief me, and I'll just tell you guys what I learned while being here.